And in this video, we're going to take a look at the recent news of how Richard Allen reappeared on the police radar, and also the recent search of the Allen property. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the items reportedly recovered from the Allen property during the police search. Now, for this information, we're using a post from the Web Sleuths forum, which has basically combined the information from Barbara McDonald and the neighbour who resides 2 doors up from the Allen residence. And it states the following: the search took place on October the 13th, commenced just before noon, and went on for 12 hours. Law enforcement arrived in unmarked vehicles and clothing. Law enforcement asked Richard and wife to exit the house. Richard stood in the driveway for several hours and also sat in the car with his wife for several hours. At some point, the neighbour said the wife left. Plenty of law enforcement just stood around for the first part of the day. As it was getting dark, Chief Deputy Liggett arrived with a piece of paper in hand. He handed that paper to Richard. Immediately, a tow truck arrived to take Richard Allen's car away. At this point, some law enforcement entered the house and some entered the backyard. They started searching the shed and taking pictures. Okay, so I'm just going to cut in here very briefly. A lot of the talk which emanated from this initial house search and the arrest of Richard Allen, the subsequent arrest of Richard Allen, a lot of that sort of early talk was, did his wife tip in Richard Allen? Was his wife the person who had contacted law enforcement? We had that side of the story. And then we also had a more bizarre one. The fact that Richard Allen had actually stole some tools or stole something from his neighbour. The neighbour had contacted law enforcement, and that is basically what had led to the search of the Allen property. Now, why I don't put much stock in either of those ideas is, for one, we have this wife who spends multiple hours in the car with Richard Allen. We've had a letter which has since been made public regarding Richard Allen looking for a solicitor or a lawyer, and that mentions his wife in a very favourable light. So I certainly don't think it's his wife that has come forward to tip him in to law enforcement. And then we look at the other angle regarding the neighbour, the stolen tools or whatever it is, the lawnmower, the wrench, whatever it is that this Richard Allen has supposedly stolen from a neighbour. I just can't buy into that for 1 second either. Because someone who has done such a good job of concealing himself for 5 years is hardly going to draw attention to himself by stealing a socket wrench from his neighbour's garage. I just don't think that is a feasible possibility. So let's continue on with this post here. Law enforcement were using a device like a metal detector or sonar around the shed and in the flower bed. They did not dig in the flower bed, but did dig up 2 tiny spots near the shed. Law enforcement started bringing items out from the house. Neighbours said one law enforcement officer came out with what appeared to be 2 large bundles of dark-coloured cloth. Could not be sure it was clothes, only that it was definitely cloth. Okay, so let's just cut in again here very briefly. Now, they talk about 2 large dark bundles of cloth being taken from the house, and I've seen quite a lot of talk online about this. You know, is this the jacket? Is this the jacket that this individual was wearing crossing the bridge? And really, you know, it's just pure speculation, isn't it? You know, it's really impossible to tell exactly what this could be. And I think it's really worth bearing in mind that when they conduct these house searches, this is to take away any evidence that may be important. You know, any sort of media, electronical devices, clothing, maybe some rags with some odd staining on. Anything that they deem of importance is going to be removed and tested from that property. So, yes, we have 2 large dark bundles of cloth. I mean, that could be literally anything. It could be, as I said earlier, just a bit of rag with an odd bit of staining on. It could be clothing in general. Also, bear in mind that we're taking an account here from a neighbour who is some distance away. Anyway, let's continue on with this post. Law enforcement also brought out a Macy shopping bag, a shoebox and a small stack of books. Said they were thin books, not thick like encyclopedia books. The neighbour said they were starting to get concerned and placed a call to the Chief Deputy Liggett to ask what was going on. And all that Liggett told them was to, quote, stay vigilant, especially with your wife and daughters. This unsettled them. The day after the search, Richard went to work. The neighbour states he saw him in store and felt Richard was continuing as if nothing happened. Neighbour said they lived life as normal till October 26th when Richard was detained. From October 26th, the neighbours have not seen anyone at the house. They have not seen the wife since he was detained. House has remained empty since October 26th. The neighbours said they were a normal family. They did not have visitors, no parties, etc. They were very quiet. Okay, so again there's mention of this house search taking place. Richard Allen then going to work the next day. This is someone who's keeping up appearances, as they say in this country. Someone who's, trying to act normal. This isn't someone who's going to be drawing unnecessary attention to himself. So this talk of, he stole something from a neighbour, or he had a dispute with a neighbour, he was caught on some camera stealing something and the police turned up. No, I just simply do not believe that. The way that this man is conducting himself is, pretty much average. He's behaving as he normally would. There's talk of him sitting out in his front yard of an evening, drinking beers, smoking a few cigarettes, going to work as normal. He hasn't fled the scene. He hasn't fled the state. He hasn't done anything, has he? He's basically just carried on as if nothing's happening. The search happens. He spends time with his wife in the car. They must go back indoors. They sleep there that night. He goes off to work the next day. And it's all very much as if nothing has happened. Now, moving on from this issue, just briefly. Recently we had the Murder Sheet podcast released just yesterday, I believe, talking about how they came across Richard Allen. How did he come back on radar? Or how did they get a tip for Richard Allen? And I couldn't actually believe my ears. I couldn't believe my ears, to be perfectly honest. Basically, what they're saying is that they were looking back through earlier tips and they were reviewing some of the tips or documentation concerning Richard Allen. Now, we've had 5 years here. 5 years. Not 5 months, not 5 weeks, not 5 days. 5 years. How has it taken 5 years to look back at some documentation regarding a resident who vaguely resembles the man walking across the bridge? He's a similar age. He lives very close to the crime scene. There's rumours that he even approached law enforcement after these murders to say he was there that day or close by. I mean, that's just a rumour. I haven't had that confirmed. But if he did, even if he didn't, why has it taken 5 years to come back around to Richard Allen? Now, maybe I could understand this if this was some tin pot village or something where you had like 10 investigators. But one thing this investigation wasn't short of was manpower. We had the FBI, we had multiple different agencies involved in this case. Yet 5 years later, we're now going back to take a look at some guy who lives a couple of miles away. I mean, really? I mean, obviously, this case, to me, is incredibly interesting. I have absolutely no personal ties to this case. But for the families of the victims, 5 years. I just can't quite understand it. 5 years. 5 years to go back and what? Look at Richard Allen's file? 5 years to look back at tips? I mean, surely this is stuff you do in the first 5 months when you haven't got anywhere. When you haven't got any credible leads. When your Ron Logan suggestion has basically gone up in flames. What do you do then? Keegan Kline, we had the Ron Logan thing, didn't we, originally? It was Ron Logan, that the FBI, that agent believed it was Ron Logan. We had all of that. Then we had the Keegan Kline angle. And then once those two suspects are not cleared, but they're not put down as actually physically responsible for the murders, at some point in time, surely you need to go back a little bit. This is a town of a few thousand people. A few thousand people, not a million. Not tens of thousands. How have they got to Richard Allen 5 years later? How have they looked at him again 5 years later when he lives just a stone throw away? A white, middle-aged man. Someone local. Someone that fits the profile. This is what I can't get my head around. He fits the profile. Why is it 5 years? 5 years to come back to someone who fits the profile. There's something not quite right with this. There's something not quite right, in my mind, with all of this. Now, obviously, at this point in time, nothing is set in stone, nothing has been verified. So take what I say next with a pinch of salt until we have all of the details. But if this does turn out to be the case, that Richard Allen was indeed just an individual on his own who happened to have a chance encounter with those two poor young girls that fateful day. He has no connection to any CSAM ring, no connection whatsoever with Keegan or Tony Klein. If that turns out to be the case, then actually it's pretty disgusting, to be honest. We had this press conference just recently, which was, in my mind at least, nothing more than a glorified back-patting exercise to thank everybody for their hard work. I'm sorry, 5 years. 5 years to bring to justice someone who's actually been out in the Delphi community, walking free, serving people out in the public. I just cannot get my head around that. If this individual was something different to what we were looking for, to what police thought that they were looking for, middle-aged man, someone who was used to walking those trails, a local, someone who knew the area, someone, to use law enforcement's own words, was hiding in plain sight. Everything seems to be have been done in this case completely back to front. Completely back to front. When you retrieve the phone of Liberty German, what is the first thing that you do? You check who she was in contact with. You speak to her friends. Who was she going to meet that day? Oh, she was going to meet Anthony Shots at the bridge. Or I spoke to someone who said she was supposed to meet him that day. That's where you start. Keegan Klein should have been right at the forefront, all the way through. Ron Logan as well, because yes, he did vaguely also resemble that bridge guy, vaguely. But surely you can move off of that pretty quickly. Once you search his house and you conduct the necessary interviews, you can move on fairly quickly from both of those individuals. Particularly if their DNA doesn't match. Do they even have DNA at this point? I mean, what do they have? Because now, we're told 5 years later, it's a man who just lives down the road. A man who with a wife, with kids, someone hiding in plain sight. That's taken actually 5 years to be brought into custody. Something is very wrong here, and I can't quite work out what it is. All of this secrecy regarding, keeping the documents sealed. If it isn't part of something bigger, then what are we doing here exactly? What is going on? If he isn't part of some CSAM ring or part of something larger than what we've been told all along, then what exactly is the reason to keep that document sealed? I just get a very strange feeling about this case. Everything seems completely and utterly back to front here. Anyway, do leave your own thoughts and feelings in the comments section below. I'll be sure to check those out and respond where I can. Very shortly you'll be able to see the Delphi playlist in front of you that has all of the videos concerning this case that I've created in one convenient folder, so feel free to check that out. And also subscribe to the channel if you're interested in the Delphi case in general. Many thanks for joining me for this video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.